There's a legend the church never officially embraces, yet it refuses to die. For centuries, whispers have echoed through corridors of cathedrals and footnotes of forgotten manuscripts. They speak of a mystery, a scandal, and a woman who once sat unknowingly to most on the chair of St. Peter. According to the story, long ago, the Vatican had a strange tradition during papal coronations. A special marble throne with a hole in the seat was used, and a young cleric was given a strange task: to reach beneath the chair and confirm something no homily ever mentioned: the Pope's physical anatomy. Only when satisfied would the cleric stand and proclaim a peculiar Latin phrase, indicating the man was indeed a man. It seems absurd now. But some believe this ritual was born from an event, the Church once forgotten, an event that, if true, shook the very foundations of the papacy. This is the legend of Pope Joan, the so-called woman who, disguised as a man, rose through the ranks of the Church and claimed the highest office of all. Her story first surfaced in writings from the 13th century, but her tale is said to have unfolded hundreds of years earlier, in the 800s. The name often given to her is Johannes Anglicus, John the Englishman. She was said to have studied in Athens, outshining her peers in theology, philosophy, and scripture. Intelligent, reserved, and charismatic, she was admired by many and suspected by none. But under the robes, beneath the tonsured hair, the story claims there was no John, only Joan. According to the legend, she rose swiftly through the church, winning favor with influential bishops and cardinals. Eventually, the College of Cardinals elected her pope, unaware of her identity. For a brief time, she led with wisdom and grace, her secret hidden even in the glare of Rome's spotlight. But legends never end quietly. One version says that during a procession near the church of San Clement, Joan collapsed suddenly in the street, and in that moment gave birth. The stunned crowd, realizing they had been deceived, turned violent. Some say she and the child were killed on the spot. Others believe she was taken away quietly, her name erased, her existence denied. The Church has long dismissed the tale. No official documents acknowledge a female pope. Her name appears nowhere in the Vatican's long, meticulously preserved papal records. But the whispers persist. Historians point to unusual gaps in the historical timeline, such as the 2-year vacancy between Popes Benedict III and Nicholas I. Some medieval chronicles, like those of Martin of Opava in the 13th century, list a female pope. In Siena Cathedral, a statue once labeled John Roman VIII Woman stood among the line of popes until the 1600s, when it was mysteriously reattributed as Pope Zachary. There's also the strange relic known as the seed stercoraria, a marble chair with a central opening, which some claim was used to verify the gender of future popes. While the official explanation is that it symbolized humility, others say its true function may have been far more practical, born from fear that Joan's deception might happen again. Even in art, her shadow appears. Early tarot decks included a figure known as La Papus, a woman in papal robes wearing a triple tiara, holding an open book. Though later altered or removed entirely, the image lingers in occult tradition, hinting at something just beneath the surface of history. There are even coins ancient, worn, and difficult to decipher minted during the period of her alleged reign. Some numismatists believe they show markings inconsistent with known papal successors. A few believe they bear symbols that could, possibly, point to a papacy long buried beneath stone and denial. And then, there's the street. For generations, papal processions avoided a particular road near San Clement. Locals called it the shunned path. No one could explain exactly why, but the legend claimed it was the very place Joan fell. Pilgrims today still visit a quiet shrine nearby. Some leave flowers. Others bring rosaries. A few bring only questions. The Vatican remains firm. Pope Joan never existed. But if that's true, why the missing statue? Why the strange gap in records? Why the unusual throne? Why the street that no one walked? Perhaps she was only a legend. Perhaps she was real. Or perhaps, like so many stories the Church holds close, she was both. Because what matters in legends isn't always their literal truth, but what they reveal about fear, power, and the fragile mystery of human history. And just when the world was ready to leave the story behind, a new mystery emerged. A strange date now circles through hushed conversations and viral message boards. August 2nd, 2027. For some, it's just a number on the calendar. For others, it marks something far more unsettling, the moment when the long shadow of an ancient prophecy may come true. The prophecy of the popes, often dismissed as myth or manipulation, has resurfaced once again. A text of mysterious origin, it claims to list all future popes from the 12th century to the very end of time. Each entry contains only a short Latin phrase, a riddle, a motto, a glimpse. Its supposed author, the Irish monk Saint Malachy, never confirmed it. In fact, the document didn't appear until centuries after his death, first published in 1595 by a Benedictine named Arnold de Wyon. Skeptics quickly pointed out its sudden accuracy up until the 1500s. Then, strangely, its details became vague, inconsistent, and open to wild interpretation. Many concluded it must have been a clever forgery, designed to sway a papal election during a tense era in church history. And for a time, the theory seemed to stick. Until 1978. That year, the election of Pope John Paul II reignited interest in the prophecy. His associated Latin motto in the text was De Labor Solis, from the labor of the sun. It was an odd phrase. But when people looked closer, they found something remarkable. John Paul II was born during a solar eclipse in 1920, and buried under another eclipse in 2005. Coincidence? Perhaps? Or something more? Then came Gloria Olivi, the glory of the olive, often connected to Pope Benedict XVI, whose name echoed the order of Saint Benedict, sometimes symbolized by the olive branch. Again, some called it a stretch. Others saw design. But what followed next wasn't a motto at all, just a final line. A final name. Petrus Romanus. Peter the Roman. According to the prophecy, this pope would lead the church through a time of great suffering, trial, and confusion. The line ends not with triumph, but with ruin. Rome will fall. The dreadful judge will come. The end will follow. For years, some speculated that Pope Francis might be this final figure. He was, after all, the first Jesuit pope. He called himself Bishop of Rome, and was the son of Italian immigrants. Even his chosen name Francis of Assisi traced back to Giovanni di Pietro, John, son of Peter. But in 2025, Francis died. And the world did not end. Now, all eyes have turned to the newly elected Pope, Leo XIV, chosen on May 8, 2025. To believers in the prophecy, this is it. The final name. The last shepherd before the storm. Searches for prophecy of the popes spiked worldwide. Pilgrims and skeptics alike debated on forums and at shrines. Is it all coincidence? Or is something ancient unfolding in real time? No one knows for sure. But the Church has always lived in tension between prophecy and tradition, between mystery and history. And just as this ancient manuscript resurfaces in the shadow of a new pontificate, another story returns from the ashes of the past, this one darker, more grotesque, and all too real. The Cadaver Synod. The trial of a corpse. It is one of the strangest and most disturbing events in all of Catholic history. And it really happened. The year was 897. The Pope at the time, Stephen Roman VI, ordered something that even today defies belief. He had his predecessor, Pope Formosus, exhumed from the grave. Dead for over 7 months, Formosus's decayed body was dressed again in papal vestments, lifted from the tomb, and placed on trial in the Basilica of St. John Lateran in Rome. The scene was as surreal as it was tragic. The body, barely held together, was seated on a throne. A young deacon was assigned to speak on behalf of the corpse, to answer questions, recite pleas, and respond to accusations as if the body before them could speak. Some accounts even claim the deacon tried to mimic Formosus's voice, an unholy ventriloquism for political theatre. The charges? Usurping the papacy, violating canon law, and perjury. The outcome was preordained. Formosus was found guilty. But this was more than madness. It was revenge. Before his death, Formosus had aligned himself with Arnulf of Carinthia, a powerful rival in the struggle for control of the Holy Roman Empire. This put him at odds with the Spoltan faction, who supported Lambert of Spoleto. And when Stephen Roman VI came to power, likely under the influence of Lambert's mother, the formidable Queen Ageltrude, the stage was set for one of the most disgraceful episodes in church history. Formosus's papal garments were torn from his corpse. The 3 fingers once used to bless the faithful were cut off. His body was dragged through the streets of Rome and dumped into the Tiber River. That should have been the end. But it wasn't. The following months turned against Stephen. The people, horrified by what had occurred, rebelled. Rumors of miracles began to circulate. Some claimed Formosus's body had floated back to shore, untouched by decay. Crowds gathered. The whispers became louder. The dead pope was not guilty but a martyr. Stephen Roman VI was soon imprisoned. He died mysteriously in his cell, strangled, though by whom no one could say for certain. Was it his guards, a mob of Formosus's supporters, or agents of the same queen who had once pulled his strings? The drama didn't end there. 2 popes later, Sergius Roman III tried to revive the charges against Formosus. Another successor later reversed them again. The church swung like a pendulum, guilt, innocence, guilt again, while the faithful watched, confused, heartbroken, angry. And through it all, the legend spread. Anyone who disturbed Formosus's corpse would suffer. Was it superstition, or something more? In these stories of corpses put on trial and prophecies that refuse to die, we see more than scandal and legend. We see the human struggle for power. The tension between truth and politics. Between holiness and ambition. And perhaps most of all, we see what happens when the church forgets what she is. Not a throne to fight over, but a cross to carry. Within a single, terrifying year after the infamous corpse trial, Rome saw 3 new popes rise and fall, each linked, somehow, to the disturbed remains of Pope Formosus. One pope was found strangled in prison. Another was swiftly removed and sent to a monastery in shame. A third died mysteriously after only 20 days in office. It was no longer a political crisis. It felt like something darker, a curse, whispered from crypts and echoed in cloisters. The people of Rome began to believe that anyone who dared tamper with the dead pope's legacy was doomed. The legend of the Cadaver Synod became more than a grotesque memory, it became a warning. A reminder that in the sacred halls of the Vatican, even the past can rise again to demand justice. But that wasn't the last strange episode in papal history. In fact, what happened over 1,000 years later would stir an entirely new mystery. This time, it didn't involve bones or trials but smoke. White smoke. On October 26, 1958, at precisely 6 p.m., the skies above the Vatican sent out a signal the world had been waiting for. White smoke rose from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel, the sign that a new pope had been elected. Vatican radio confirmed it. Bells rang out. Crowds gathered. Tears filled eyes across St. Peter's Square, but the balcony stayed empty. Minutes passed. Confusion spread. No announcement. No appearance. Then suddenly the white smoke darkened. It turned black. Papal tradition is simple. White smoke means a pope has been chosen. Black smoke means no decision. So which was it? The Vatican later blamed it on a technical mix-up, claiming the stove mixture used to generate the smoke had produced an ambiguous color. But to some, it felt like something else had happened, something deliberate, something silenced. And from that moment forward, a theory was born. A theory that still refuses to die. It's called the Siri thesis. According to those who believe it, the real pope chosen in 1958 was not John Roman XXIII, but Cardinal Giuseppe Siri, an Italian archbishop known for his strong anti-communist stance and unyielding conservatism. They say Siri received the votes, accepted the election, and even chose a name. Gregory Roman XVII. But before he could appear, something or someone intervened. The story goes that certain powerful figures inside the conclave received a threat. If Siri was announced as pope, the Vatican would face immediate nuclear consequences. Some claim the threat came from Soviet operatives who feared Siri's ideology. Others point to backroom diplomacy between superpowers that wanted a softer, more cooperative pope. Faced with global catastrophe, the cardinals allegedly rescinded the election and turned to a safer choice, Angelo Roncalli, who would become Pope John Roman XXIII. It sounds like conspiracy fiction, but details make it hard to dismiss. American Cardinal Francis Spellman was seen leaving the conclave looking visibly shaken. John Roman 23 broke with tradition by keeping the cardinals locked inside for an additional 24 hours after his election, an unusual move. And when Siri himself was asked about the event decades later, his response was chillingly simple. Let's not talk about that. If the story ended there, it might have faded into obscurity. But the Vatican's next move was curious. It overhauled the smoke system. They contracted a fireworks manufacturer outside Rome to create precise chemical compounds to color the smoke white from potassium chlorate and lactose, black from anthracene and sulfur. The goal, they said, was clarity. But to believers, it felt like more than a technical fix. It felt like a way to avoid ever seeing gray again. Supporters of the theory point to declassified State Department memos, one titled John Roman 23, another Cardinal Siri. Both remain heavily redacted. To some, the blacked-out lines are not redactions. They are echoes of something hidden. They claim Siri lived the rest of his life as the true Pope in exile, recognized by a secret group of followers who called him the Red Pope. Not for politics, but for the crimson mozzetta he never exchanged for papal white. A man who, in their view, wore the office of Peter in silence, denied the throne, but not the calling. To skeptics, the whole thing is Cold War paranoia, a fantasy stitched together from smoke, fear, and coincidence. But for others, it's a reminder. A reminder that even in an age of modern weapons and international diplomacy, the ancient mysteries of the papacy still carry a power no nuclear force can match. The Vatican, a place of solemnity and ritual, is also a place of shadows, where power is not always what it seems, where centuries of tradition guard secrets too deep for daylight, and where sometimes whether through trial, prophecy, or smoke the silence says more than the words ever could. They called him the Pope who quit. But the strange truth buried with him might tell a darker story. When the tomb of Pope Celestine V was opened in the year 1630, those present made a chilling discovery. A small, square-shaped hole in his skull. It was clean, deliberate, as though something sharp and intentional had been driven through his head. Official history says he died peacefully in confinement. But who locks up an 86-year-old hermit? And more importantly, why? Born Pietro Angelerio in 1209, Celestine never pursued power. As a young Benedictine monk, he left behind the noise of the world and retreated deep into the mountains of Abruzzo, living in solitude and prayer. His quiet devotion drew followers, eventually forming a monastic movement now known as the Celestines. Even as others gathered around him, Pietro stayed humble. He wore rags, slept on straw, and spent long nights in silence, seeking only closeness with God. But in the year 1292, the church had reached a breaking point. The papal seat had remained empty for 2 long years, with the College of Cardinals hopelessly deadlocked. No agreement, no leader, just division. From his remote monastery, Pietro sent them a letter, a simple message born not of politics, but of conviction. In it, he warned that their delay was an offense to heaven. And if they continued to ignore their duty, he wrote, divine punishment would follow. For a group of desperate cardinals, it was enough. One of them, Cardinal Latino Malabranca, took it as a sign. Pietro was to be the next pope. A delegation was sent up the mountain to deliver the news. They found the old hermit still living in simplicity, completely unaware of the decision made in his name. And when they told him that he was now Pope Celestine V, he hesitated. Then, humbly, he accepted. He was 85 years old. His time as pope would last only 5 months, but what followed would echo for centuries. Celestine tried to reform the church in the image of early Christianity, modest, disciplined, devoted. But he was no politician. Quickly, he found himself manipulated by outside forces, particularly King Charles Roman II of Naples, who used the elderly pope as a pawn. Celestine, overwhelmed and disillusioned, made a bold move. He issued a decree that allowed a pope to resign voluntarily, a possibility that had never been formally written into law. Then, using his own decree, he stepped down. It was one of the most unexpected moments in papal history. His successor, however, saw him not as a holy man but a threat. Boniface Roman VIII, fearing Celestine's popularity might spark unrest or rival claims to the throne, decided not to let the former pope return to his mountains. Instead, Celestine was imprisoned locked away in a stone cell at Castle Fumone, a remote fortress far from public view. There, in isolation, Celestine died. Forensic studies centuries later concluded that the hole in his skull was likely inflicted after death. Yet the rumors of murder persist. Some believe Boniface had him silenced permanently. Others whisper that the injury was a final insult, a warning to those who challenge power with humility. Witnesses claimed that on the night of Celestine's death, a glowing cross appeared in the sky above the prison walls. The faithful took it as a sign that heaven had welcomed him home. That, in the end, the man who had only ever wanted silence was heard by the one voice that truly matters. Celestine's story is unlike any other. He's remembered not for speeches or decrees, but for a decision that no other pope dared to make before him, the decision to walk away. And yet, that decision meant to bring peace may have cost him everything. To this day, he remains a figure shrouded in mystery. Was he a saint, a prisoner, a martyr? Perhaps all three. For those who visit his tomb now, there is no coronation ring or golden crown. Only quiet, and a lingering question carved into the stone. Why would a man so holy be buried with a hole in his skull? Celestine V died behind stone walls, forgotten by those in power, but never erased from memory. The man who longed for solitude became a symbol for something larger, a church often caught between divine calling and human ambition. His quiet resignation may have been intended to end conflict, but in truth, it exposed it. It raised a question the Vatican has never been able to fully bury. What happens when holiness and hierarchy collide? Celestine was canonized just 2 decades after his death. Officially, he is a saint, a man of simplicity, faith, and sacrifice. And yet, his sainthood exists side by side with one of the most suspicious deaths in papal history. His body lies on display in the Basilica of Santa Maria di Collemaggio, his bones encased in glass, and the wound in his skull still visible beneath the ornate vestments. Some pilgrims visit in awe, others in unease. The image is unforgettable. A pope who walked away from the greatest power in Christendom, now lying in eternal silence, surrounded by the noise of centuries trying to explain what really happened to him. But Celestine's story is not just about the past. It's about the Church today. Because to this day, only one other pope has resigned. Benedict Roman XVI in 2013. When he stepped down, many immediately thought of Celestine. Benedict even visited Celestine's tomb a few years before his resignation, leaving behind the pallium, the symbol of his office, on the glass case. At the time, no one thought much of it. But in retrospect, it felt like a farewell. A gesture not just of reverence, but of foreshadowing. And when Benedict resigned voluntarily, like Celestine, the same old rumors returned. Was he too under pressure? Was his decision spiritual or strategic? And once again, the Church found itself walking the thin line between transparency and secrecy, faith and fear. It is in these patterns that the most persistent questions take shape. How much of the Church's history is truly written down? How many decisions were made not in the light of prayer, but in the shadow of politics? How many popes, like Celestine, were chosen not because they were wanted, but because they were needed to fill a silence no one else could? And how many were removed the same way? The Vatican is often described as a place of beauty and timeless truth. But it is also a palace of power and institution shaped by men who were both saints and sinners. Within its walls, great acts of charity have unfolded, but so have betrayals, manipulations, and silences that stretch across centuries. Celestine reminds us that the papacy is not just a spiritual role, it is also a burden. And not every man is built to carry it. Some are crushed by it. Others walk away from it. And sometimes, that decision, though noble, comes at a terrible cost. There is something poetic about Celestine's fate. The man who warned cardinals against delay was pulled into the very machinery he feared. He wrote from his mountains to urge the Church to act only to become the answer they chose. And in choosing him, they gained not a ruler, but a mirror. a reflection of what the papacy could be if stripped of politics, pride, and performance. But mirrors are dangerous, because they show things people don't always want to see. And in that way, Celestine V did something no other pope has quite managed. He exposed the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the greatest power is the power to walk away. Today, Celestine's legacy lives on quietly in statues, in books, in brief mentions, in homilies and history lessons. But more than that, he lives in the hidden questions we all ask when the Church faces moments of decision. What does it mean to lead? What does it mean to serve? And when is silence more powerful than speech? These questions don't only belong to popes. They belong to all of us. They echo in every priest's rectory, in every bishop's residence, and in the heart of every believer wondering what holiness looks like in a world of noise. Celestine's life reminds us that leadership in the Church is not always about strength, it's about surrender. Not about control, but about trust. And not about legacy, but about obedience to a voice louder than politics and deeper than fear. Even in death, his silence has a presence. Pilgrims still travel to his tomb. They kneel beside the glass. Some pray, some leave notes. Some just stand and stare at the skull beneath the silk and wonder, what would I have done? Would I have said yes? Would I have said no? Would I have walked away? The Vatican, of course, continues to function with precision and reverence. The conclaves are sealed. The archives guarded. The processions flawless. But history always leaves fingerprints. And Celestine's is one of the clearest. It's in the way the Church handles resignations today with more caution, more explanation, more ceremony. It's in the way popes now speak of discernment, of listening to God's call, not just the world's demand. It's in the way people have learned to see the white robes not as untouchable, but as human. And perhaps that's the gift Celestine gave the Church, even if it cost him his freedom. The permission to be vulnerable. Because if a pope can say, I can't, then so can a priest on the edge of burnout. If a pope can say, I must return to silence, then so can a faithful mother overwhelmed by life's noise. If a pope can walk away, not out of cowardice, but out of courage, then maybe that example can free others to listen to their own callings more deeply. And then, of course, there's the question that haunts every Vatican corridor, every archive, every sarcophagus deep below the stone. What else lies hidden? How many more stories like Celestine's have been sealed behind Latin titles and lost to time? How many names were struck from the records, not because they were unholy, but because they were inconvenient? How many bones, like Formosis's, are buried with secrets no one dares exhume? And in a city that holds the tombs of over 90 popes, how many still have something to say? Celestine may not have spoken much as pope, but his life, his choice, has continued to speak louder than any sermon. He reminds us that truth isn't always dressed in triumph. Sometimes it's dressed in rags, living in a cave, and writing letters that change the world. So the next time you see a headline about a new pope, a church scandal, or a Vatican decision that shakes the world, remember the man in the mountain. Remember the cell at Fumone. Remember the small hole in the skull. And remember that behind the grandeur, behind the incense, behind the centuries of tradition, there are real people. Fragile, faithful, afraid. Just like you. Just like me. And once in a very long while, one of them says no to the throne. And in doing so, walks directly into sainthood.